Hey everybody, it's Eugene Lisho here, and welcome to episode 24 of Forensics Talks. Just before we get started, just a couple of quick announcements. The first one is last week we had a short notice cancellation from Dr. Peter Collins, who's a forensic psychiatrist. It's one of the risks you have when you're dealing with people who are operational, and just about 15-20 minutes before the talk, he got called out to something he had to take care of, a crisis situation. So we're going to try and reschedule him for another time. Also, just to let you know that the week of April 6th, I'm going to be restarting the photogrammetry week. So we just finished off the photogrammetry course a few weeks ago, and just yesterday and the day before, we finished off the second part of that, which was a cloud compare course. So thank you to all of the attendees who were there. It was a great, fun time. So if some of you are interested in the next round, that's going to be coming up. You'll see the announcements on my website and that sort of thing. All right. For today, speaker is Ed Nordskog, and Ed received his Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Bemidji State University. That's in northern Minnesota from 1982. He also has a Master of Science in Emergency Services Management from Cal State University, Long Beach in 2007. He also served in the Marines from 1979 to 1990. He achieved the rank of captain, and he worked in areas such as field artillery and terrorist counteraction. From 1986 to 1997, he worked as a sheriff deputy in custody patrol, as a detective in burglary, robbery, assaults, fraud, and major crimes, and even as an undercover detective in narcotics. He's conducted over 5,000 criminal investigations of just about every type. He's recently retired, but he did serve as a full-time arson and bomb investigator with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department since 1997. He's investigated over 2,100 arson cases. He's testified on over 95 cases as an arson expert. He's been involved in over 60 fatal fire investigations and 46 serial arson investigations. He's also the author of several books. We're going to talk to him about some of those. His most recent one is Arson Investigation in the Wildlands. That's from 2020. So I'm going to bring him in here. There you go. Hey, Ed, how you doing?
Good morning, Eugene. It's still morning where I'm at in Los Angeles, so good morning.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. Well, look, let's start at the beginning. And I'd like to know, before you sort of got into the whole law enforcement thing, what got you involved in that direction, when you sort of were thinking about what to do?
Well, actually, good question. I was 12 years old and I read a book. I read all the time. I still read 2 or 3 books a week. But I was reading a book that my mother had, and it was from Joseph Wambaugh, the famous police writer from Los Angeles, and called The Young Centurions. And I said, I want to go to Los Angeles and be a cop someday. So I'm from a small town in northern Minnesota, and my parents spent the next 10 years trying to talk me out of it, and wanted me to go to law school and things like that. I went to college in Minnesota, and then made a pit stop for about 4 years in the Marine Corps, and then kind of washed ashore in Los Angeles, trying to get hired by whatever agency would hire me in 1985. And I got recruited by the Los Angeles Sheriff Department, which I'd never heard of at the time, but it's the sister agency, the Los Angeles Police Department, and it has about 8,000 sheriff's deputies on it. It's a massive department with massive region that it polices, with roughly 9 to 12 million people in the region that it polices. So we have mountains, we have deserts, we have oceans, we have really fancy areas, Malibu and Marina Del Rey and West Hollywood, and then we have some really gritty areas. So the nice thing about being in a department like that is you get everything. You just get inundated with everything. And so I was only in uniforms for probably 3 years of my career, went to detectives, was promoted into detectives, and just worked at really high volume stations in the 1980s and 1990s. So you saw pretty much everything every day, handling multiple murder scenes. It was the height of gang violence, and I worked in a heavy gang area. And so you got good at working really fast. You just got kind of good just through repetition. Mm-hmm. And eventually in our department, you go two ways. You either climb the detective ranks or you go administratively and, you know, promote to be a sergeant or lieutenant. And then it's pretty much administrative work after that. So I wanted to stay as a detective, and I ended up on the senior detective job, which is the arson and bomb squad. I had no interest whatsoever in it. Everybody asked me why are you a wannabe fireman? And no, it's the highest paying job in our department, so I guess I'm a bit of a mercenary. And another huge draw is you don't really have a boss. You have unbelievable freedom for an agency. You're given a car and you're given caseloads and you do it on your own, and which is all I needed to hear. I can get paid pretty well, and I don't have a boss to answer to. And even when I had a boss, you know, we kind of don't listen to them, but they just turn us loose. And the sheriff department still enjoys that their detectives are fairly freewheeling. It's not run like TV where there's some captain downtown telling you as a detective what to do. Mm-hmm. It's your case. You take it from cradle to grave. In doing so, in starting that particular unit, I knew nothing of forensics, which is obviously what your show's about. But I forced myself to learn what I could, and we work hand in hand with our CSI folks at our crime lab, our criminalists, and people like that. And we're standing at scenes with them. We run the scene, and we're asking them for advice and providing whatever help they can give us.
Right.
Of course, we have a giant crime lab in Los Angeles with dozens and dozens of specialists, and if I wanted to, I could call 100 people to a crime scene.
Yeah, okay.
That doesn't happen very often, but I could have had those resources, and we did use those at various times on very large cases.
Okay.
So anyways, you get busy through volume work, and if you screw up today's case or don't do well, you're going to get 3 more tomorrow. So be ready for that.
How busy were you at the time? Like, is arson a big problem where you are?
So arson's a big problem everywhere, and wow. It's just not statted very well by the fire services. So I'll explain as briefly as I can that in Southern California, there's various big sheriff departments that are the actual arson investigators. Most of the United States and most of Canada, it's firefighters that are the arson investigators. And I don't know why we do it differently in California. It seems to work out really well for us because we're already trained investigators before we get in the arson unit. And then we spend the next 5 years just learning the science of fire and how to deal with fire scenes and everything that goes on. So we sort of have a leg up as far as the investigative side of fire investigation. And to answer your question, my unit was, when I started in my unit, there's 22 full-time arson bomb investigators. So we're the bomb squad. So the guys in the puffy suits will get 2 to 3 bomb calls a day every day. And then we'll get 20 to 30 arson calls a day every day. In the summer, much more. In the winter is when we get all the fatal fires. So you're going to pick up a fatal fire every week at least. And so you just have to work really hard and really fast because you're going to get more cases tomorrow.
Yeah, no kidding. So in terms of a percentage, you said that the stats aren't all that well, but in your opinion, like what would you estimate the number of fires that are out there to be arson or intentional?
So the statisticians will about have a heart attack now. About half of your fires are intentional. If you look at all the fires in the world, well, let's go to the Western world because I don't know much about the other part. That includes Europe and that includes Canada and the United States. Half the fires are intentionally set acts. Now, there's a bunch of fire chiefs having heart attacks right now, but this is factual. Ask any fire investigator. The statistics do not reflect that. They're more like 10 to 20% are arson. That's because most fire statistics are based on structure fires, large fires. My agency, for whatever reason, we investigated every single fire that happened in our jurisdiction. If a cup of coffee caught on fire, we would send an investigator to it. Most agencies do not do that. They don't have the luxury to do that. And so that's a fire that has never been investigated. And that'll dovetail into what I think we're going to talk about today, serial arsonists, why we get so many in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because we're looking for them.
Right.
And certain agencies never have serial arsonists because they don't look at small fires. And that's a manpower issue. That's a administrative issue. And so, but to answer your question, every town over 5,000 people has fires and has arson fires. They're just not these big giant buildings burning down like you might expect. It could be just trash cans on fire and rubbish in an alley, or,
sure.
or out west, it's vegetation is a huge thing in town or in the countryside. So it's most of those are actually incendiary fires. They're intentionally set.
Okay. So in terms of let's say the current or in the past, or like the way that a fire investigation goes. I mean, firemen show up, they're obviously, worried about, saving lives and making sure that, damage is minimized. But at that point, the investigator shows up, and then what's the typical, procedure to go? I mean, in a criminal investigation, it's collecting evidence, it's doing all this stuff. Where do they start when they start an investigation like that?
So the fire investigation is more difficult and more technically difficult than any other investigation in law enforcement. There's nothing like it. There's so many different dynamics, and you hit upon it. You already have the scene that has changed before you got there. It's out of your control, and so we don't cry about that. The firemen have their first mission is to rescue people. That is their first mission. Then the firefighters' next mission is to save property. Or stop the fire, of course. And everything they do is destructive to a crime scene. Now, we don't even know if we have a crime scene yet. And so we have to wait till the firefighters have the fire out, and then the investigation starts. And an investigator will typically be called to the scene by the local fire administrator. And some agencies call investigator to every scene, but most agencies do not. They only call them to the bigger ones, or to the, and that's where we start to lose the statistics. Anyway, an investigator arrives and they conduct a very scientific-based investigation, usually following the scientific method of inquiry. But it's very regimented type of investigation, and it's very simple. But it's also very subjective, because they start at the scene, they get a quick statement from the first in firefighters, and you want to get them before they leave and before they forget what they did or what they saw. But the problem with that is they're not your most important person to interview. They've always been said, you got to talk to the fireman. They know it. If you think in practical reasons, the firemen are already 10 minutes behind the fire, or more. Even the fastest fire departments don't get there, in seldom under 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So what you really want is to find out who reported the fire. Gives you a little bit better timeline. And you want to know from them, where did you see the first flames? And remember, that's not necessarily where the fire started. That's just where somebody saw the fire. That fire could have been burning for 3 hours before somebody saw it and reported it. So you do interviews quick, and then you start on your scene processing, which is simple scenes the investigator does by themselves. Much larger scenes, or every fatal scene, we bring a team out. And so you start out with exterior photographs. And the best weapon for any investigator at a fire scene is a camera. If you can't take good pictures, you're not going to be a good investigator, because you have to document this thing. Even if you're a brand new investigator in the arson world and you don't really know fire science that well, you can still capture a scene correctly if you just follow the process. And then you can call somebody, maybe like me, who has a lot more experience. And if you have good photos, we can rebuild this scene, at least on paper in a computer. And if you have bad photos, there's nobody that's going to be able to help you, because you lost the evidence.
And those types of scenes can be quite challenging, right? They're all charred black. There's water. There's stuff that's collapsed, and you may not be able to get close to. It may not be safe to get close to some of these areas that you're photographing, right?
Sure. So you have a lot of dynamics going on, just like you said, Eugene, and you have a dangerous scene already. There's a reason firefighters wear helmets and boots and gloves and air masks, because of the scenes, the toxic hazards, the collapse hazards of, there might be 1,000 gallons of water in the ceiling above you. You don't know it. You don't want to be under it when it collapses. And this can happen an hour after the fire or 3 days later. Floors collapsing. Every fire investigator I know has been injured to some extent by stepping through floors, stepping onto nails. Big thing is stepping on nails. And you can hear, when you hear a scream at a fire ground, the investigator stepped on a nail and it's stuck in his foot now. And that's happened to probably half the investigators I know. And so you have all that going on. And then you have the other dynamics, which aren't as pleasant for our talk, is that the firemen, God bless them, they're more interested in making sure that the fire never comes back. So the flames are out. It is no longer their scene, but they don't recognize that all the time. They just want to start disassembling this house and taking your scene and throwing it out in the street. And they're not purposely trying to ruin your day, but that's what they're doing. And that's called the overhaul operation. So on most fires, we can't control it. And every fatal, we have to get the fatals right. If we don't get anything else right, we have to get the fatal fires correct. Mm-hmm. You call the fire captain or the fire chief or lieutenant from the moment you get called and said, please stop all your overhaul operations. They will not be happy with that. I'll just tell you right now, they're not going to be happy. They have 50 firefighters standing around and they know it's going to be an hour for you to get there or to do your thing. But that's just the way it has to be, because whatever they do is basically evidence destruction after that.
I was just trying to think about the similar scenario and how ridiculous it would be if it was a shooting or a homicide, and then you get a team to come in and spray everything down with water and kick stuff around and move stuff out of the way. I mean, it would be unheard of, right? It's just not something that you would do in that sort of scenario.
Right. So a partner and I wrote a book on practical fire death scene investigation, and we talk about all the things that police allow to happen that they would never allow to happen in a shooting death. Say a drug house murder with 3 dead people, that gets locked down so tight, so fast, the scene is preserved.
Yeah.
But if you have the same situation, instead of a shooting, there's a fire in a drug house, it's unbelievable how many people visit that scene and the police allow them to come in. And this is every agency, because they're carrying a helmet and a clipboard, and all the insurance company shows up. The gas and the electric companies show up because they want to turn off the utilities. But really, they're sent there by corporate attorneys to make sure their appliances didn't screw up. And so you have all these other issues. And we tell them nobody goes in the scene, and what we get there, we'll see 20 people standing in the scene. Yeah. And even the Red Cross, God bless them, they will come into scenes. So we need to really hound on our scene personnel that are there first, the police officers or the firefighters. Nobody goes in, and that means nobody. And that's our first big hurdle with something like that.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. With respect to, so an investigator gets there, and I mean, you made a comment about, almost, let's say, half of these fires, possibly being intentional. How difficult is it? And this is a very broad question and possibly even poorly framed, but how difficult is it to discern between an accident versus something which is intentional? Is there a big, large gray area there, or is it, in some cases it's black and white, it's very easy to tell? What can you give me some scenarios?
Sure. Great point. I'm supposed to say the party line in the fire investigation world and says it's all difficult. It's extraordinarily gray area, and it takes intense, weeks, days of analysis. And you need various scientists and engineers and electrical engineers and all these people. But that is true on many fires. But in my experience and then when you look at a accidental scene versus a arson scenes for the most part are extraordinarily black and white. It's quite simple to figure out what happened here, provided that the firefighters got there in a reasonable time and you have something to look at. Because obviously, if it's way out in a rural area, you might have an hour response time for a fire department, and now you're looking at what we call as a black hole, and there's not much to go on. But in most urban areas, the firefighters do get there under 10 minutes. And so you have, and of course, materials in modern era are made to survive fires and slow fire down. So you have something to work with. And it's my experience that arson cases, by and large, are fairly straightforward. There's a few that will really make you work to do the scene. Now, accidental fires are actually much more different. And you have a fire for no reason, and now you're trying to figure out why, and you go into, hopefully you're good enough to read patterns and get to the room of origin. That was our next step, is to interpret fire patterns, which is purely subjective based on your skill level. You want to get to a room of origin, and then you go in that room and try and figure out what could have started a fire. And the first thing you do when you get into the fire investigation world is unlearn everything you've ever been told in your life about fire, because it's wrong. Smokey the Bear was wrong for 50 years, telling you what cigarettes can and cannot do. And most household electricity is actually quite safe, even on 100-year-old homes. Cigarettes in modern times can't light hardly anything on fire, but they're blamed. Both those two things are blamed for a lot of fires. Appliances, they fail more than household electricity. And then of course you have the human factor, which is my big specialty. Is how did this toaster maybe cause this fire? And then you realize that some kids were playing with it and stuffed it full of toilet paper or something. So those are actually quite tricky cases.
Okay, let's move into the serial arsonist part of this, because that's an area that you specialize in. And tell me a little bit about the type of people who may or who are serial arsonists. How do you start with, like, I have to believe that there has to be some kind of a repeating pattern. There has to be a number of, you're like, hey, look, there's in this area, there's 5 repeated fires or something. What's a good starting point to talk about the serial arsonists?
All right, so that's a good analogy. So I'll just give a little background here. So I've worked on personally over now 60 serial arson cases, and I've been also a profiler and helped other agencies on another 50 or 60. I've testified on about 40 or 50. And I've actually accumulated case histories over 1,100 serial arsonists. So I have a pretty large library of serial arsonists, and you hit on right away, you picked a scenario of 5 fires. The first thing that we look at is the size of the fire means nothing. So I know some people are interested in that. Fire chiefs are interested in that for other reasons, but an investigator is not concerned about the size of a fire. We're looking at the intention of the fire setter. If you see 5 fires that capture your attention, they capture your attention for a reason. Is it the same type of target that's being set on fire? Did they all happen in a short period of time? Like I told you, Los Angeles areas that I policed would get 25 fires a night. So someone said, we had 25 fires last night. You go, yeah, we call that Tuesday. It's no big deal. But and on the 4th of July, you're going to get 125 fires in one night because of all the fireworks being used. So just numbers alone don't mean much. Maybe now if you say 5 car fires, okay, that means something now. But then you realize that 3 of them are accidental because the people are actually driving their car, and that's the easiest way to tell if a fire is
right.
And so you can eliminate those. But your typical urban serial arsonist is somebody on the city streets is going to be lighting whatever they can light on fire in a small geographical area, because they're usually on foot. So now you find 5 fires in dumpsters along an alley 3 blocks long. And now you have a serial arson case. It's not the most sexy one. It's not going to make the news, thank God, because you really don't want to put it in the news. And those are easily solvable. We do solve most serial arson cases once we start working on them.
Okay.
The overwhelming majority we solve.
So some of the so I guess there's a couple scenarios, or maybe there's more. Maybe there's several, but one is someone wants to just make some noise, or like you said, they set a dumpster on fire. It goes up, it causes a commotion, whatever, but no real, let's say, impact to the community. But then what about someone who's intentionally trying to maybe kill somebody, by setting a fire in their residence or something like that? And then what about somebody who's just doing it for I mean, do people do it? People must do it for example, insurance fraud.
Right. So typically in the past, so you've picked three different things right there. Somebody trying to kill somebody with fire. So for most people involved in the world of arson, they're just like most murders. They're one and done criminals. They're not serial offenders. They're really mad at somebody. They're going to light a fire to burn their car, their business, their house, whatever. They're going to try and kill them with fire. It is extraordinarily difficult to kill somebody with fire. Fire is a very slow-moving weapon that you can't point at anybody. And most healthy people, young people, will escape fire. So it's a bad weapon of choice. It's a good weapon to intimidate somebody, of course. So most serial arsonists are not interested in that. They just light fires. So their fires tend to be actually not very exciting. Like I said, trash dumpsters, number one, vegetation, palm trees in California is a huge target. They burn really cool, and guys and they'll go down the street and light 15 palm trees on fire. Wildland serial arsonist is a totally different breed of cat, though. That is somebody who wants to burn the world down. And that's what I just wrote my recent book on, was wildland serial arsonists. And those are the people that literally, without exaggeration, have the power of an atomic bomb at their fingertips. They can burn an entire city down. And you can imagine something like the Great Slave Lake fire up in Canada. I mean, it burned for weeks. It burned, half a city down. And it's all starts with a match or a lighter. So it's nothing, that person has the power of an atomic weapon at their hands. It's pretty scary. And there's actually quite a few wildland arsonists, especially in the American West and the Canadian West as well. Those guys are more serious. Our urban arsonists are a little less serious, but let's go back to your dumpster scenario, Eugene. If a guy is going down an alley lighting dumpsters, nobody gets too excited about that. It could be kids. More often than not, it's going to be somebody who is sort of a transient, sort of a homeless type person, because their whole lifestyle is leading them to this. The drug use is a huge factor in serial fire setting. Modern day meth and opiates are huge causal factors for why people set fires. So we have a lot more serial arsonists than we did in the 1950s because of the use of drugs. But what if one of those dumpsters, three of them in a row are, just out there in an alley. One of them's up against the back of a building. Maybe it's an apartment building. Now the same person lights the same dumpster the same way and walks away, because they usually don't stick around. And now you have $1 million loss, and maybe people jumping out of windows, and maybe because it's in the middle of the night, it's always in the middle of the night. And maybe somebody dies, the elderly people who couldn't get out. And so now everybody gets all excited by the same guy who just lit 3 fires the night before, and you weren't excited about that. That's sort of the issues we deal with in this business. Any serial fire setter is a problem, a huge problem. And sooner or later, by design or by accident, they're going to have a big fire if you allow them to continue. It's just going to happen.
Are any of the serial, or maybe any of this well-known serial arsonists, are they also, for example, are there any that are well-known that are also, for example, they're just murderers or killers or just bad people that do all kinds of other stuff?
So yeah, that's a good question. So when the FBI did all their profiling studies in the 70s and 80s, and they looked at serial killers, and a side function of that was they noticed that a lot of serial killers had arson in their background. But I want to be very careful. It's not all, and it's not even, I don't think it's even half. But a lot of people, they want the Reader's Digest version, the short version. They said all serial arsonists will become serial killers. That's not even remotely true. There's a lot more serial arsonists out there than there are serial killers.
Okay.
And there's tens of thousands of serial arsonists. A metro area the size of Toronto, it's a huge metro area, is going to have 50 to 100 serial arsonists. They're just not active all the time. They might light a spree of fires and then go away for 2 years. And I mean, go away, stop lighting fires. So it has so much to do with their mental health and the chemicals they're taking on board. But there have been a lot of serial killers, of course, famous ones that started out as serial arsonists. Probably the most famous, and most people will not know him as an arsonist, is the Son of Sam. In 1977 in New York, he murdered, it was called the 44 caliber killer. David Berkowitz is his name.
Berkowitz. Yeah.
So he lit between 2,000 and 5,000 fires before he ever killed anybody. He didn't use fire to kill anybody. He did that with a handgun. And he wanted people to know who he was. Besides giving himself the name Son of Sam, he'd given himself the name of the Bronx Avenger, and he'd given himself another name. And he phoned in most of his fires.
Oh, he did.
He was actually a fire buff who, most serial arsonists suffer from OCD amongst a whole bunch of other things. And he kept detailed diaries of all his fires. He was never, ever in his life suspected as a fire setter, but he was a serial poisoner, a serial arsonist, probably the most prolific serial arsonist in history that anybody knows of. And then, of course, a serial killer at the end of his spree. But he lit a fire the day before he was arrested. That's why he thought he was getting arrested for, to be honest. He didn't realize, that they were onto him for the shootings. But he lit a neighbor's door on fire. So he's one of those guys that yes, he's been lighting fires his whole life. And when he started killing people, he still continued to light fires. His fires weren't really designed to kill anybody. For the most part, they were mostly outdoor fires and in empty buildings and in empty lots. Mm-hmm. But one of the other famous serial arsonists is from my area out here in California is John Orr. He was an arson investigator and an author. And he lit somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 2,000 fires. But in the middle of his spree, he lit a multi-fatality fire that killed 4 people. That didn't slow him down. He continued to light highly dangerous fires, and up till a couple weeks before he was arrested a few years later. So he.
Okay, hold on. You said he was an arson investigator.
Yeah, he's the most famous arsonist ever identified. His name's John Orr.
But he was an arson investigator who's lighting fires.
Right, and he was constantly his case alone is probably one of the most unique in the history of criminal justice. I can't think of another case as unique as John Orr's. And a lot of guys in my industry, of course, know him because he was a firefighter for 20 years. And that brings up the whole ugly subject of firefighter arsonists, and there's lots of them. But John Orr was not only that, he was a fire investigator, and he wrote books about it, and he wrote books in forensic journals or wrote stuff in forensic magazines about how to catch serial arsonists. And the whole time he would give interviews constantly about serial arsonists plaguing his area. It was him. It was him the entire time. He had a lot of other issues, and we could go for 4 days on John Orr alone.
Oh my God! Yeah.
I've written about him extensively in my books, and there's 3 or 4 other books about him. But he had killed people, and there's quite a few others that have done that as well. And most of them did not intentionally kill people. I'm not trying to give them a break. They light fires, and they don't really care what happens afterwards. And that's what you get with your wildland arsonists. They're lighting a fire in bad conditions. It's only bad things can happen, and they have no ability to control it once they light it.
Okay.
Do
people, for example, these serial arsonists, do they have I mean, you made the comment before that, arson is just a weapon. It's like a tool. It's like a weapon, right? It's just like a gun or a knife, and then there's fire, right? And so they can
for the majority of people who commit arson, it's just a tool or a weapon. A tool used by people committing fraud. You mentioned a fraud fire. Mm-hmm. That's some businessmen are technically serial arsonists because they lit their business on fire 5-8 different times. It's just a business model for them.
Yeah.
I consider them serial arsonists, but I don't think that the behavioral analysis people do. But that's just a business model. So there's no malice other than to defraud an insurer, and that's just how they do business.
Right.
Of course, and then there's some arsonists who light wildland fires to get business. Also, it's business related. Maybe they're contractors who support wildland firefighters. There's all their dozer operators or tanker operators. And if they have a season where there's no fires, these guys are losing millions.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to put myself in the position of if I want to light something on fire, sometimes I go camping, and last summer I went camping, and I'm trying to show off to my kids how I can light a fire, and the damn thing keeps going out, right? So sometimes it's not so easy to get things to burn. But if you're going to choose to light something on fire, do people choose fuel or some kind of accelerant? Like what kind of choices are some of these people using? Or for example, are any using devices?
So great question. I break serial arsonists down into two huge main categories. In the old days, we used to think organized and disorganized, and that's not very helpful in catching anybody. So I break them down into the urban serial arsonists, people operating in a town of sorts or a big city, and the wildland people, because they're night and day different from each other. The urban serial arsonists generally, in the most cases that I've looked at, do not use anything other than a lighter. They walk down the street, pick out a target, whatever happens to capture their fancy at the time, and they just apply a lighter to it and they walk away. Those cases are difficult because there's no forensics for you, other than maybe there's a footprint, and maybe a witness saw somebody, maybe followed them, and maybe there's a video camera, we can get an ID. So there's some forensics involved. But they take that lighter away and you have nothing to look for at a trash dumpster, all that stuff. The wildland serial arsonists are a little bit more serious guys. They go out with the intent, in most cases, to light a big fire. And they don't want to be there when it's lit. So they, more than any other group, will use a device. I wrote a whole book on devices, and the most common place to find an incendiary device is in a wildland setting. With one exception, is an extremist-based arson. When I say extremist-based, somebody that's doing animal rights groups or things like that did arsons in the 90s. They used devices at 100% of their fires. And that's how we track them. We could tell which group was using which device. But other than that, other than extremist groups, you're most likely to find devices amongst wildland arsonists and firefighter arsonists. And sometimes they're one and the same, wildland and firefighter arsonist. And then the device is the key to the case. And I'm a bomb and arson expert. And when we look at a bomber, we look at his device. That tells you everything you need to know about this guy. And it's usually a guy, what they use as a device. How they built it, what they built it out of, where did they learn to do it? It's learned behavior. And then we get it to a forensics lab. And there's plenty of forensics on devices, and we follow what the military, both Canadian and American, British militaries did in the Middle East or in Iraq and Afghanistan with their bomb teams, and use forensic exploitation to identify the bomb makers. That's who you want, is the bomb maker. You can get some moron to plant the bomb in the ground, but you want the guy who built the brains to the bomb. And that's how they identified hundreds of these people with their DNA on the components of this device. Mm-hmm. So we do the same thing if we find devices in arson. And I have to be clear about this. It is extraordinarily rare to find a device in an arson case. It's extremely, extremely rare. But you do find them more in wildland settings than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. What kind of technologies are being used today for investigation, like chemical or thermal, different types of, I don't know, all light sources? Like what does the fire investigator have at their fingertips to help with their investigation?
Well, a lot of guys, both in the private sector and the public sector, will use either a mechanical sniffer of sorts, or in the public sector more often nowadays is an accelerant canine. But you have to remember that a lot of people who set fires do not use accelerants. If it's a certain type of fire, that's where you have to do a little bit of profiling work. If it's a spite revenge fire, it's 50-50 whether there's going to be accelerants used. Somebody's just really mad at the time and they do something, they grab whatever they can at the time and light a fire. Mm-hmm. It might be a fatal fire, it might be a huge fire, it might be a small fire, but maybe they use lighter fluid, maybe they try and use whiskey or alcohol, which doesn't work very well, but they tried. And so you look for that. Some of the best tools are accelerant canines and the mechanical versions, and then just an investigator's own nose. You can, if they use gasoline or diesel at a scene, which is the most common accelerants, you can pretty much smell it after pretty good sized fires.
Okay.
And now you know where to collect. Now that's not evidence, of course. You have to then collect the evidence and get it to a lab as fast as possible, and that's the forensic side of it. And there's been a whole lot of, fire science looked at in the last 30 years, and we've gotten way, way better than we were 30 years ago. And so everything, I don't care if you have a scene and your dog hits on it and you smell gasoline, you collect a sample, and if the crime lab says we got nothing, you have nothing. You could write a report, we smelled gasoline and the dog hit, but that's not really tangible evidence. Mm-hmm. And so it has to be backed up by a positive laboratory test.
Okay.
So it's used quite a bit. Other things that they're looking for besides that is, accidental fires. We want to find out the people that investigate those, the failures, because there's huge money in investigating product liability things. So they're doing incredible forensics in private labs on appliances, wiring, things like that, to see what failed. So that's a whole different side thing. I stayed in the public sector and had to work with criminal things, but my contemporaries who make a lot more money than me in the private sector work hand in hand with engineers and scientists, doctors every day, looking at products and appliances and things like that.
A lot of areas in the forensic sciences obviously have been coming under scrutiny for being, subjective and all this other things. What would you say about, fire investigation, death, arson investigation? Is it still under a lot of scrutiny? Has there been a lot of improvement? What's the current status of that discipline?
It's chaotic, like some of the other stuff. I don't, and most investigators don't consider it a pure forensic science when you're at the scene, because of the somebody like me, hopefully they're well trained, has to interpret fire patterns to even follow the fire through a house or a building to get to where you think the fire started. And that's a lot of, interpretation of patterns. And so you have to know that science part of it. And then when you get there, you have to try and find out what the two items that came together to start the fire: an ignition source and a fuel. And when I say fuel, a fuel could be hair, clothing, newspaper, gasoline, whatever. Then you have to decide, is this intentional or not? That's actually quite difficult. And so there's a lot of forensics, but there's also a lot of craft work involved, and in understanding fire patterns and fire movement through a property. Okay. So there's a huge debate in our industry, and it's been ongoing for 30 years. We're way better than we were 30 years ago. We're still not great. It's not a pure forensic science. I don't know that it ever will be, but there's a lot of it is based in forensics.
Okay. What about training? So if you're a fire investigator today, what's the quality and of the training like out there, and do they have, do most people have good access to good training?
So nowadays, the old school is everybody trained on the job, OJT. And if the guy that was training you didn't know what he was talking about, you're not going to know what you're talking about. And the guy you're going to train doesn't know what he's going to talk about. And that's been sort of the rub for a long time. But starting maybe 20 years ago, I got into business 22 years ago. Maybe I came in at the right time. There's unbelievable high levels of training. Most of it is free to people in the public sector anyway. And there's no excuse anymore not to be adequately trained to do your job. And we recognize that for a long time, there's a lot of people being paid to do a job that they had absolutely no qualifications to do, and making life and death decisions. And their only training is what whoever trained them told them over coffee one day. Mm-hmm. Now there's certification processes. There's international groups. The biggest one is the IAAI, International Association of Arson Investigators. And the only reason I say that, I've been a member for around 20 years, is they have a certified fire investigators training platform. A lot of it is free. And then you go through, and a lot of it's online. So you learn the science of fire and fire dynamics and fire chemistry and things like that. And then there's probably 30 or 40 or 50 classes that people can take for absolutely free. And then I would always mix that in with real scene work, because you just can't do it on from your computer, and then mix that in with ongoing training every year. And I provide ongoing training every year to people in fire, death, and serial arson. And there's plenty of other people who do that as well, all over the United States, several in Canada. So there's a lot of resources. Like I said, and there's a lot of books out there by scientists. Nowadays, there's no excuse not to be trained and certified as a fire investigator. There's really no excuse.
Well, you said books, and guess what I was going to ask you about just next? So I was going to ask you about your books. You have a whole number of, or several books that, starting from back, was it 2012 or 2014?
So 2011, I published my first book on serial arsonists.
Okay.
And that's the cover of it at the top of your page there, sort of a garish cover. I like to be dramatic like that. Book you're looking at right now is Fire, Death, Scene. That was the fastest selling book for a long time until COVID hit. And that was based on my partner, Joe Conifol, and my reviews of hundreds of fire death cases. And we're talking accident, suicide, or homicide. And we look at the same mistakes happening over and over and over, because now you have maybe four different specialists at the scene, and they're not talking to each other. And the four specialists are the arson fire investigator, a homicide investigator usually, and then a coroner or medical examiner investigator. And then modern times we have CSI people. So we have four experts at your scene, and nobody knows who's in charge. Homicide guys don't want to go anywhere near a burned body or a dirty scene. They're going to get their shoes dirty. And so the arson guys may not be trained in body recovery. And some arson guys say, I don't work around bodies. You have to in this business. And then the coroner people or medical examiner people sometimes just want to grab the body and go. Well, the body is your evidence. It's part of your scene. And there's no rush to pick it up and go. You have to process it. So we wrote that book as sort of a handbook on how to do those scenes and minimize your mistakes. It's actually really popular.
Yeah, I see. And then you have you mentioned this one already, the incendiary devices book already.
Right. So I wrote that based on, I've heard a lot of people testify on incendiary devices. There's so many myths, just like serial arsonists. So I did my own research. I studied about 3,500 cases of where actual incendiary devices were used in criminal cases, and compiled the data and looked at it from a real point. So that is a really good form of forensics, is device analysis. And I can't think of more than 3 people who do it. Other than taking the forensics off a device, there's actually the analysis of the device itself is super important. It'll tell you exactly who did this. May not give you their name, but it'll tell you everything in the world you need to know about them.
Right. And then you've got what's that about?
So that's about my study of serial arsonists, and that's how I not afraid to tell my opinion, but I waited 11 years in this business before I thought of writing a book. And it was after I listened to, there's a famous case that a serial arsonist killed some people, and I listened to all these talking heads on TV, and some of them were famous FBI profilers at the time, talking about what an arsonist is and isn't. And I'm like, these guys know absolutely nothing about it. They're given such generic, useless information that it could be anybody. Half the guys in my office could be suspects. So I studied, like I said, I'm up to 1,100 serial arsonists, their case files, and I compiled them into a bunch of short stories on various types of. I've personally identified 27 different subtypes of serial arson alone. So if someone always asks me, what's a serial arsonist like? I go, there's at least 27 different types that I'm aware of. There might be more. And so that's what that book is about. Okay.
And this one here, this Fire Racers book, what's that about?
So that's another cool cover. That's based on a real case I investigated. Where so that's the Hollywood version of an arsonist. And I actually wrote that with the intent to distribute it in Hollywood, and a couple of different groups have purchased the rights to develop it, and of course they haven't. But it's the really scary, stalking, murderous arsonists who are just relentless and obsessive. They're all true cases. Most of them are mine. That in this picture that you see on the book cover, this guy came from China to stalk his girlfriend, and he threw her a Molotov cocktail and hit her right in the head. Jeez. And you talk about a guy that pre-planned this, and then he burned himself up. So it's an unbelievable case, and that's what that book is full of, cases that are actually quite unbelievable.
Okay, this one here, the arsonist profile. So this is obviously your specialty, right? This is
my specialty, yeah. And I try to do a practical form of profiling, and I say that because I'm a huge believer in profiling, but then I'm also a non-believer in certain types of profiling that have gotten just horribly bashed in the past because they're garbage. They're no better than witchcraft. True profiling is looking at what the offender does at the scene, not profiling a person, but profiling their actions, profiling the scene if they're not there. Who could have done this? Who couldn't have done this? And so each of these cases shows numerous subtypes. It's got 60 or 70 cases. It's a really thick book, including the largest arson task force ever put together case in there. But it's basically on all the different subtypes of arsonists. Right. And the back cover of the book, I make fun of the traditional profile of an arsonist and a pyromaniac that's been going around for 40 years. It's not true. It's not even remotely true, and it fits most of the people that I work with. So it's just too generic.
Right.
Each case is specific. Each crime is specific. But what they do at the scene tells you a lot of who did this or who could have done this.
Okay. Tell me about your latest book, though, the wildfires book.
So we wrote a book on wildland arson investigation. There's a couple books out there on how to do the origin and cause of a wildland fire. It's a very technical, highly technical thing to wander through the grass and the twigs to try and figure out where this fire started in the wildlands. Then when you get that now, and there's quite a few people in our wildland sector, Canada and the US and all through the world, that are quite good at that. They struggle. I've looked at a lot of cases. Now I review lots of cases in my retirement age, and I looked at a lot where they fail is taking it from, okay, they've determined that it's an incendiary act or an arson. Now, how do you link a subject to that scene? And the arson profession has been woefully behind on things like DNA and using forensics to catch people. They seem to be in love with the idea of catching people on camera. And that's nice if you have it. You don't have that too often in the wildland sector. So the book is about how to actually link them to the scene using forensic issues, foot impressions, tire impressions. You can do MO, build an MO case. The book is full of pattern analysis using patterns, and that's one of the most effective forms of profiling is pattern analysis. People's repetitive behavior, the sort of behavior they exhibit, and now you can fine tune an area to look in. And so that book just came out about 3 weeks ago, and I think we've sold about 300 copies in 3 weeks. A lot to Europe of all places, and some to Canada, Australia, Africa. So it's my work is to try and do the human side of the arson case and more practical uses for the investigators at the scene.
Okay, cool. I'm trying to find your most recent book here. Is it on Amazon, or where can people pick it up if they're interested?
It's a good question. So I have to actually look myself. It's on a website called Arson Wildlands with an S book.com.
Let me bring it up here. Let me see if I can get it going.
arsonwildlandsbook.com. That's pretty cool cover photo.
All right, let me bring it up here because I want to see. I'm going to add this banner and see if that's correct. I think that might be right. Let's see. Is this it?
So that's what you do when you get on the website. That's a unique incendiary device. If you go down to the book cover, just kind of scroll a bit. That's me standing.
There we go.
All right, so there's the book cover, and it's really important for us to use this photo of some unnamed investigator standing there, and he's contemplating. The book is actually full size. It's a really heavy book, but he's contemplating what he has to do to solve this. Instead of just running out in the middle of this field, and we use this for a reason, because this is a thinking person's game when you're an investigator. You look at, you have a problem. The problem is, this is part of that photo is part of a series of about 40 fires, and he knows there's a device found about 20 feet from him. He doesn't need to run out there and look at it again. He knows, who do I have to bring here to help me solve this and link an offender to this scene? And it's all forensics. You have a roadside, you have dirt, and they solved this case pretty quickly, to be honest. And one of the devices, if you scroll to the top, is at the top of the website. That's one of the devices in that series. It's such a unique, weird, bizarre thing. It probably wouldn't have worked. In fact, that's a failed device. But the thread that you have your cursor on over the matches was the key to the case. This is such a weird, bizarre device. And of course, we can all look at the cigarette and say, well, you're going to get DNA off the cigarette. And they did. But what is the rest of the device? The suspect in this case did a bunch of fires, and he used the same thread in every device. That was a linking factor. And he also used similar. There's a purple cotton rag underneath that thread, and he used something like that on several of his devices. And just bizarre stuff. It's a really bizarre case, and this device wouldn't have worked, but it's okay. He left it for us. It was exploited by the investigators, and they found a truly dangerous guy. He literally was trying to kill firefighters. He was mad at them. So that's pretty rare, but that's what that book is about, how to link somebody.
Good stuff. Well, I'll tell you what, I put up your website. If people want to get a hold of you, I guess arsonprofiler.com, is that one of the places they can go?
It is. And I'll just tell you this, I'm not trying to sell anything other than the books. I'm retired. I do a lot of private work for attorneys and prosecutors now. For any public agency person, I work for them for free. I will look at any case you send me, and people send me, I get cases every week. And I give them maybe a profile, or I tell them what they're looking at and how to go about their investigation. And I've done this all over the world. It's still free. And I'll work with you for weeks on end if I have the time. And the only time that I ever get paid on something like that is if I have to go to court and testify. Then their prosecutor will pay me. But I look at a lot of cold cases for various groups, and I like staying active in that. The good Lord only blessed me with one skill in life, and that was be a good investigator. And so just because I'm retired, I haven't stopped. I've looked at over 100 cases in the last year alone. And I like doing it, and I like helping people with various agencies. I've done a bunch in Canada, and a bunch in the US, and several in Europe. So they can contact me and ask for help. Now I leave that up there because I know some kooks will contact me. Some of my past clients have contacted me. Some of them said, hey, how come you didn't put my case in your book? These are guys that got out of prison or whatever, and they're upset that I didn't put their case in my books or something.
All right. Well, listen, Ed, I really appreciate you coming on. There's some great information here, and I mean, there's a lot of depth to obviously each of these subjects, so we can only touch on so much. But I think we touched on a lot of really key topics here, and hey, all I can say is I really, really appreciate it. Hang back here when I say goodbye, because if not for anything else, I'm gonna have to give you an award for figuring out how to get all the time to write all these things. I need some advice after this on how you do all that stuff. So which is great. So
thanks, listen, appreciate it.
All right, all the best. Hey, you take care. Bye-bye. All right, folks. Well, that does it. Really interesting topic, some great insight there as well. Next week, look for some information on some of the photogrammetry announcements that I have. So there's going to be free photogrammetry week if you're interested in some of that training. Also, our guest for next week is going to be Professor Caroline Wilkinson, and she's from Liverpool John Moores University, and she is the director of School of Art and Design. Her background's in anthropology, and she has a specialty in facial reconstruction. And so that's what we're going to be talking about next week. On that note, hey, listen, everybody, thank you so much. Appreciate you watching. Next week, Thursday, 2 p.m. Take care. Bye-bye.